Hello, my name is Chris Shilling. I'm a Professor of Sociology in SSP, SSR at the University of Kent. And in this introduction to the sociology of religion, I want to focus on 5 main issues, and they're going to reflect the 5 main segments of this talk. First of all, I want to ask, why should we study the sociology of religion? Or even should we study the sociology of religion? Secondly, and assuming we do, and we should, I want to look at some of the dilemmas, some of the problems, and some of the potholes that are awaiting a person who is wanting to study the sociology of religion. It's important to be aware of those as we go ahead and we explore different themes and different issues. Thirdly, I want to ask the question about how sociology views the sources of religion. Where does religion come from? This is a tricky question. No one's going to have an easy answer to it, but it's important to ask how sociology identifies the origins of religion. Is it with individuals, or is it within societies, or is it a mixture of two? Fourthly, I want to focus on some of the most important theories that we will encounter when we are studying religion. A good theory is like putting on a new pair of glasses. It enables you to see things clearer. And we'll be looking at a few different theories when we come to that section. And finally, I want to focus on some of the hot topics, if you like, some of the contemporary areas that an understanding of how religion has manifested itself these days is important to our understanding of society in general. So let's go on to the first of those in the first section of that talk, and that is, why study religion? And you might think that's a strange question to ask, but actually, the founding figures of sociology, it was one that they were very serious about, in that the thought generally was that with the development of modernity, with industrialization, with the progress in science, the idea generally for many of these scholars was that religion was on the decline. And indeed, a number of them thought that religion was going to lead to, there would be an inevitable situation whereby religion held no more than a residual part in societies, no more than a residual part in the lives of just a few people. Many thought that religion was on a path that would lead to its ultimate death. That was certainly the case with Karl Marx, often identified as one of the founders of the discipline. For Marx, religion was actually a way of mystifying class inequalities and oppressions. And Karl Marx thought that with the withering of capitalism and with the reduction of oppression, then religion would wither and die too. Somebody else who had a fairly pessimistic view about the future of religion is the sociologist Max Weber. His view was different from Marx, but he also thought that religion was would no longer be as significant as it used to be in the medieval era and indeed the early modern era. For Weber, it was to do with the development of rationalization, with rationality and with science in the modern era. And Weber argued that those developments meant that religious belief and practice would be eroded. That there was no longer the basis for people to hold their religious convictions on. And as Peter Berger argued, what science has done is emptied the sky of angels and replaced it with astronauts. And that's a nice way of kind of summarising the gist of Max Weber's thought on the subject. Now, those views about the decline and the potential terminal decline of religion were enshrined within the secularisation thesis, a theory which became dominant in the second part of the 20th century and which held that religion had reached a period where it was in its death throes. That's to simplify it, but not enormously. And that view of religion suited those who thought that sociology was really a rational product of the Enlightenment, a post-Enlightenment science, something which would spread reason and would illuminate the world for people in order to help people engineer the world to their own desires. And part of that push from those people who viewed sociology in that way was that sociology would help displace the irrational and the superstitious. And a lot of sociologists identified religion as part of that irrationality and superstition. So there we have a lot of views that suggested that maybe religion is not something that now, in the early years of the 21st century still, we would be studying. And yet, for many people, religion is as much, if not more important now than it ever has been before. And there are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, the secularisation thesis that I mentioned, the idea that religion had reached a state of gradual but nevertheless inevitable terminal decline, has been questioned. It's been questioned seriously. It hasn't been completely discredited, but increasing numbers of people now do not think that it is necessarily describing the dominant processes when it comes to religion across the world. Following the resurgence of Islam in the latter decades of the 20th century, and also following what became known as the New Reformation in Christianity in parts of Africa, South America and elsewhere, Peter Berger, who was one of the most prominent and influential theorists of secularisation, completely changed his mind. He turned his back on the secularisation thesis. He concluded that the world is as furiously religious as it ever was. Now, Berger does not represent everybody when it comes to that. There are still strong arguments when it comes to suggesting that the secularisation thesis is still relevant, but nevertheless, his volte-face, his turnabout is very significant. The second reason that it is worthwhile continuing to study religion is that the majority of the world's population still practice their faith. Now, as sociologists, this should be very significant to us. If we follow Max Weber's dictum that sociological explanation consists not just of causal accounts, but also should focus on empathy, empathetic understanding. Max Weber referred to this as Verstehen, the science of understanding what it was like. And even if you are not religious, if you want to be a sociologist, it's important to understand, to empathise with other points of view. It's only by doing that Weber and other sociologists suggest that we can actually accomplish genuine and comprehensive sociological understanding. The third one is that even if you're not particularly interested in religion as a subject in its own right, it's become impossible over the last few decades to understand local, national, regional, international, geopolitical conflict without having an understanding of religion. And this is not an understanding which suggests religion is just a reflection of inequality, or religion is just a reflection of ethnic differences. If we want to understand the conflicts that are going on in the world today, we need to have an appreciation of religious belief and practice, and the contribution of that to conflicts around us. The examples are multiple. Think about 9/11, the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Think about the situation in Palestine. Think about the Palestinian conflict there. Can't be understood without religion. A very different example, think about the controversies in certain secular states such as France, which have forbidden or have restricted the use of the wearing of the hijab. These are examples of contemporary conflict that can only be understood when we actually take into account the significance of religion. The fourth reason that I think it's important to study religion is that it raises issues about other subjects in sociology. And I just want to touch on one here, and that is a subject concerned with gender and feminism. And I want to do that just by mentioning Sabah Mahmood's book, The Politics of Piety. And that book is a report of a study that Mahmood did where she looked at the Egyptian piety movement. And Mahmood interviewed and did ethnographic research with, in this case, a number of women who were members of the piety movement. And what she found was that they were covering their bodies far more than was actually required by the country in which they lived. And this, for many Western feminists, raises certain questions, certain quandaries. Why is it that women should be covering their bodies even more than is actually required? And Mahmood found that actually they were seeking to stimulate a sense of shame in order to become better Muslims. Now that, if we talk about that in the terms and understandings of contemporary Western feminism, is quite interesting. Second wave feminism from the 1960s and 1970s sought to banish the shame that women were often made to feel about their bodies. So again, the study of religion cross-culturally, across the globe, different religions, is really useful in that it raises issues sociological issues that we might have taken for granted, and it helps us put them in a different light. Finally, last but not least, the fifth reason that I think it's important for us to focus on religion is that religious processes, religious beliefs and practices are utterly central to the two core problems that have preoccupied sociology since its origins, and those are the problem of order and the problem of meaning. The problem of order, and this goes back beyond sociology, and it was formulated most influentially by the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, but nevertheless what it comes down to is asking the question of how it is possible for people to live together relatively peaceably for significant periods of time. And the point about the significance about religion here is that historically and indeed contemporarily, religion has in many nations been central to the exercise of power, and sometimes it's been very closely aligned to the exercise of state power. So religious powers have been relevant to the question of why it is that people have been able to coexist relatively peaceably for significant periods of time. The second main problem that's preoccupied sociology since its origins is the problem of meaning. And the assumptions here are that humans are meaning-seeking species. We may, for periods, act on the basis of habit or affect or emotion, but the assumption here is that humans need to attribute certain of their actions with significance. They need to attribute their lives with a degree of meaning, especially in the context of the inevitability of death. And historically, but also contemporarily, religion has been enormously important in enabling people to attribute their lives with meaning. Think about the impact that religious views have on contemporary notions of right and wrong, of good and evil. Think also of the way in which religions tend to relativize the problem of death, the inevitability of death, by placing human corporeal death within a broader cosmic context, often but not always a cosmic context which acknowledges rebirth, which actually identifies a form of life after death. So religion then, the fifth reason that we should look upon it as an important topic, is that it's been central to the two core problems that have preoccupied sociology since its origins. Indeed, Talcott Parsons, one of the most influential sociologists of the 20th century, argued that the dominant values that pervaded American society, instrumental individualism, as he referred to it, and worldly instrumental activism, had religious origins, had Puritan roots. So for Parsons, even in a society which many people see as at least significantly secular, even if not dominantly secular, nevertheless religious values continue to inform the meaningful basis on which people act. And just to reinforce this point even more, if we look at the Latin origins of religion, we have two related terms. One is religio, which is concerned with respect for the sacred, and which is absolutely connected to our sense of what is most important, of what is most meaningful. And the other is religiare, which is concerned with binding, the binding of human beings. So we can see from that that even the term religion itself has origins which are centrally important to what it is that human beings find meaningful on the one hand, and on the other hand, the binding or ordering of human relationships on the other. And what's more, even if you are somebody who argues that secularisation is continuing apace, this raises an important issue, because historically speaking, there's no doubt religion's been important to social order, and it's been important to the meanings that people attribute to their lives. And if that is indeed the case, and if it is indeed the case that religion is declining, we need to ask, and sociologists have asked the question, what is going to take its place?